We are looking at the relationship between individual and society, and this video is in a sense equal to the prior video where I discussed what's the relationship between the individual and the social. But I'll try to make this video without referring back to the previous video, so that you can actually use it without referring back to, or without relying on the previous video. So one of the thinkers who stresses on the priority of the social or society over individual is Durkheim, and he's a very interesting figure in the sense that on the one hand he believes that modern societies, the defining characteristics of modern societies is individualism. And in fact, he differentiates between modern societies and pre-modern societies based on his distinction between mechanical versus organic, solidarity and mechanical solidarity, the characteristics of pre-modern societies, in the sense that in those societies collective consciousness dominates individuals, and the fact is that the difference between individualism is very small or very little. On the other hand, modern societies are based on organic solidarity, so there is a collective consciousness, but the defining characteristics of that collective consciousness is that it's hold on the individual is very loose, very light, and that's why in modern societies individuals, and that's the hallmark of modern societies according to Durkheim, is that the differences are huge, and that's what defines modern individualism. And the interesting thing about Durkheim's position is that on the one hand he believes that collective consciousness is very important. And on the other hand, he also believes that modern societies are based on individualism. And he is the defender of modernity, so no doubt that he is for individualism. But he thought that modern societies, because of the excessive individualism, they also create many problems for themselves and many specters for themselves. We don't need to go into that. So, but Durkheim is important because he doesn't see any inherent contradiction between collective consciousness and individualism. And even though I don't think he has thought through the issue to its logical conclusions, but what I take from him is that there are types of collective consciousnesses which create different types of individuality. So there's no inherent contradiction between society and individual in that sense. So even though he realizes the priority of the social, he also realizes that in modern societies you have the type of the social which itself spawns or generates individualism. So he's different from a lot of individualists in the sense that a lot of individualists think that there's some inherent contradiction or opposition between the priority of the social, and individualism. So, for example, a lot of liberals think that, and social contract tradition has a very different notion of individualism and how it's related to society. Anyway, we are getting ahead of ourselves here. Let's go back. So, if we try to build on this Durkheimian insight, and even hopefully at the end try to go beyond it, we should start like this. I'll do this in point form so we can remember the sequence of our argument. So Durkheim is clear about, and we agree with him about the priority and also the independence of the social. Social from individuals. Let's take independence in what sense? Independence, not in the sense that the social is not affected by individual, but in the sense that the social society is more than this total of individuals and what the individual do. Society is more than that. So society is not the collection of individuals. Society is an independent reality in this sense. So we have individuals, we have collection of those individuals at a time, and then we have society. So that's what we mean by the independence of society, not so society independent in this sense, that it has its own existence beyond individual and beyond collection of individual. That independence doesn't mean that these two, let's say 3, 2, and 1, independence doesn't mean that these two don't affect this, or whether this doesn't affect this and that, but it means that it has its own independent existence. It has its own independent reality, and I think that reality is manifested, as I said in the previous video as well, in a few things: language, institutions. In all institutions can include specific institutions like the institution of family or institutions of education, but it also can mean more fluid things like culture, social traditions, and collective consciousness, etc. So in that sense, society is independent of individual. Also, society has priority over individuals in the sense that, what does that priority mean? Society's priority. Firstly and foremost, I think it means factual priority. Or to state the same thing in a more technical language, I guess, I would say this is ontological priority. That society exists before the individual, and in the individual and the individuality is constituted within society. So society has factual priority in the sense it's like it's like a language, for example. Language, even though we influence language and it changes, language is always there. We grow up within language. So it is the condition of our possibility, both of our freedom. So freedom doesn't mean anything outside language. And it's also the condition of our limitations. Limitations don't mean anything outside the language. And this can be said more robustly with respect to society. Society is always there. And within that society, individual is shaped. So freedom is shaped. Limitations is shaped. Not deterministically, but whatever is possible for individual is within within a society. People can opt out of society, but even the person who is opting out of a society, it's come from a society. And secondly, if they opt out of society and grow more like Robin Crusoe, they would be growing up in a different society or different environment. So that environment will provide society for that person and shape that person. So in that sense, society's priority that it has factual priority. And then it has priority in terms of values as well, because whatever values we grow up with or socialize in are first provided by society. So you can call it axiological priority or whatever the word you want to use. So interesting thing is, by value provide priority, we mean conception of individuality itself. Shaped within and by society. So society has both ontological priorities and axiological priority, if we want to use that word. And in this sense, we can say the social is the condition of the possibility of the individual. So different types of collective consciousness leads to different types of individuality. It can be individualistic individuality, it can be communitarian individuality, and so on. So in that sense, society is foremost a conditions of possibility, and limit only in the secondary sense, because whatever the limits are can't work without these positive aspects which comes first. And what we need to get rid of really is the notion of freedom as way out. So some people have this conception, some libertarian views and some anarchist views, freedom as a way out of all the limits. So freedom basically limitlessness, but there's no such condition possible, even in a desert. So it's totally figment of imagination as well, as far as we are concerned. So what we have got up to is different social arrangements. And by that I mean different types of societies. Make possible different type of individualities. So, for example, if we take Durkheim's distinctions at face value, mechanical solidarity leads to a type of individuality. And organic solidarity, on the other hand, gives birth to a type of individuality. Number 6, individual differences are always to be understood in the context of a particular social arrangement. And here my difference with Durkheim's stands out, because what we have said leads me to believe that individual differences, or since individuality presupposes a particular type of social arrangement, that's why that individuality can only be understood in the context of that particular social arrangement. So to say that, like the way Durkheim says that in pre-modern societies there's hardly any differences among individuals. On the other hand, modern societies are based on differences among individuals, a lot of differences. That's what defines modern societies. That's what defines modern individualism. And saying this is not wrong as such, but it misses the point, and it misses Durkheim's own point. And the point is, we can't understand the meaning of differences, individual differences, in abstraction from a particular social arrangement. So it really, even though we can talk about the difference between modern societies and pre-modern societies in terms of more freedom or lack of freedom, it misses the point. It is misleading in the sense that what we mean by freedom and individual differences in the context of modern social arrangement is totally different from what it would mean in the context of pre-modern social arrangement. So, and this is not to spawn any relativism. It's more to introduce what we call contextualism. You cannot understand the term individual or individuality. I mean, you can talk about them in abstraction, but you cannot understand their significance except in the context of a particular social arrangement. And that's why there's no way for you to compare two social arrangement 2 without prioritizing in this way, the way Durkheim does, without prioritizing modern social arrangement. So basically, when he talks about less differences or more freedom or less freedom, I mean, you can do it, but the point is you are then imposing your own picture of society on a society which is very, very alien in that respect. And you're really not understanding that society at all. You're just providing a lousy justification for your own social arrangement. So, in that sense, comparison between individual freedoms in different societies and individual differences in different societies, or individual differences, freedom and differences without the context of social arrangement is an abstraction which is misleading, at least in in a way in which Durkheim uses this abstraction. In more abstract terms, there's always a space in any society for individual variation, individual freedom, individual differences. But what are the dominant desires, ambitions, imaginations are entirely different. You can think of a person living even today, in a remote village, going through his life, which has its meaning for him or her. Freedom if I am put in that position, I might feel shackled. My freedom might I might feel that my freedom is curtailed. But that's not the typical feeling of a typical member of a society. And it's not necessarily because of any domination or anything. That's what that social arrangement produces, that type of individuality for which fulfillment and freedom, fulfillment means something else. And it doesn't mean that in that society people can't feel. There'll always people who are misfit for our society. But a typical person in that society doesn't feel any need to, get out of that society, or doesn't feel the limits that society creates as impositions. And if typical person start feeling that, then that society is not going to survive. You will need a different type of society. And you will need a reconfiguration of the society. So I think we have covered a lot of ground. I don't know whether it was coherent or not, but there are at least some points which are clear. And the central point is that individuality is made possible by a particular social arrangement, and we can't understand a particular notion of individuality. And I would say individualism is one notion of how to be individual. You can't understand those particular notion of individualities without referring back to the social arrangement which make those individualities possible. Okay, I'll stop here, and next time we'll see where we can, if we could develop some of these thoughts further.